DJ Moore traded to the Buffalo Bills for a second-round pick. Luther Burden is just dodging bullet after bullet here.
I mean, his yards per route run, I think, for rookies, he's the best over the last however many years, other than Odell Beckham Jr. So, yeah, I think there's reason to be excited about him. He's just, he moves differently than other players, Theo. Like, it's like watching Allen Iverson play basketball. Like, he's just so quick that he is hard to stay with. So, yeah, I'm really excited about him. I've got him at wide receiver 11 in my Dynasty rankings.
Pat burying the lead right there. Wide receiver 11 for Luther Burden. Luther Burden to the moon. Redraft ends, but Dynasty is life. I'm Theo Gremminger, joined today by Pat Fitzmaurice of Fantasy Pros. We're breaking down some of Dynasty's biggest winners and losers in the early portion of NFL free agency. Pat, really looking forward to breaking it down with you today. But one interesting player that we've got to kind of touch on, Jeremiyah Love. Love is an interesting one because we saw for weeks and weeks and weeks multiple mock drafts projecting Jeremiyah Love to go to the New Orleans Saints at 8 or the Kansas City Chiefs at 9. Both of those teams addressed the running back position in a major way. New Orleans signing Travis Etienne, Kansas City signing Kenneth Walker. We'll talk about those guys a little bit later. But now when you look at an elite prospect like Jeremiyah Love, where are you projecting him to go realistically? And what's a realistic landing spot that would make you go nuts and make you really, really hyped for a player we're already all very high on?
Man, at this point, Theo, I feel like there are only 2 realistic landing spots. Well, maybe 3. Titans at 4, Giants at 5, although that would seem to totally kneecap them on Cam Skattebo, and maybe they're just giving up on him after the injury, but that seems strange given how much he showed them in his rookie year before the injury. And Washington at number 7. Like, I feel like he doesn't get past number 7. Washington at number 7 would probably be my favorite of those landing spots. Just pair him with Jaden Daniels, and man, the RPO stuff would be pretty fun that they could be running in Washington with those guys and just kind of consolidate that backfield. It was messy last year with Bill, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, and by the end of the season, it was Chris Rodriguez as their primary early down guy, and like don't really use either of those guys on third down. So just like have Jeremiyah Love be the guy there. Be a little less exciting to see him land in Tennessee or with the Giants.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the counter argument to us, I agree with you. I think Washington would sort of be the nuts landing spot. It's the big playability would shine next to a mobile quarterback like Jaden Daniels. I think it would open up those big, high value touch runs that Jeremiyah Love has been really, really synonymous with at Notre Dame and what gets us so excited. But the counter argument would be if he goes at 4, then you're talking about a running back going at 4, and Tennessee might build their entire offense around him. So I think all of those spots are pretty good, and I think it tells you what they think about Cam Skattebo if they make the selection for Love. I actually think that it's probably going to be Tennessee or Washington, and then I think there's a chance we could see a shock trade up if people are really valuing Love like a prospect that's a higher level player than like Ashton Jeanty was last year. Some teams might have it on their board. So we will keep an eye on that one. And just a bird's eye view, Pat, how excited are you about this rookie class? There's been a lot of mixed opinions on Dynasty Life. Some people who are kind of negative towards the class, other people a little bit optimistic. Where are you at just in terms of looking at this class, maybe in comparing it to the last few years, your excitement level?
Pretty negative. I mean, it's a below average class, Theo. And if we get excited about every class and want to, I don't know, get out over our skis and just be super enthusiastic, then like no class is good if every class is good. You know what I mean?
There you go.
So we are going to have a candy store of a rookie class next year. Like the 2027 class everyone has been pointing to for a while, and I think with good reason. There's some outstanding prospects lined up. This one, we know there are going to be some hits. It's just going to be a little harder to identify them this year, and there just aren't as many sure things. It's Jeremiyah Love, and that's probably it.
Yeah, and it's also just such a thin class of quarterbacks, which I think is ultimately like brings it down. I think, there's certain managers who are listening to this playing, maybe I play single QB format. single QB, you're in better shape this year than the super flex drafter who's rooting for a guy like Ty Simpson to get into round one, rooting for a guy like maybe a Garrett Nussmeier to be a first few picks in the second round type guy, but with no clarity and no confidence in either one of those second two guys. And Fernando Mendoza, a player who I like, and I'm not sure where you're at on, but probably wouldn't be the number one pick in a lot of other drafts. You talk about like the Caleb Williams year. Even last year, I think Cam Ward would have gone ahead of him. So I think I'm with you.
I think he's pretty comparable to just in terms of like what caliber prospect he is. I think Cam Ward is a fair comparison, and I think I actually like Mendoza a little more than Ward. I've got some Indiana University family ties, so I watched a lot of the Hoosiers. Maybe it was a little biased, but I thought Mendoza was terrific this year against some pretty high-level competition. Just really like the accuracy of the processing, but I totally get it. Like, he's not a over-the-moon Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May caliber prospect, and basically he's the only guy. I mean, maybe Ty Simpson sneaks into the first round, but man, he kind of crashed and burned late last year, and I don't think he's a first-round caliber quarterback.
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you. I think Ty Simpson's one that I would be very, very nervous about, and it would sort of be like a game theory reason why I'd be taking him for my dynasty teams, where, hey, I'm at the 202. This guy just went 16 overall, and he's a quarterback. I want to take a chance in case he works out, rather than, I love Ty Simpson. This is a guy that's an impact player for my roster. So, yeah, we will look forward to hearing your thoughts on the rookies throughout the offseason. We're going to talk about where you can find Pat's work shortly. But, Pat, we're talking about players who are winners and losers, and free agency just started. We are recording this in the middle of the week. Monday was the legal tampering period. Legal tampering is basically the start of free agency. Technically, we're recording on Wednesday where it's actual start of free agency. Maybe we'll find out some Kyler Murray news, but a lot of the big names have already signed, and there's fewer big names out there just a few days later than when we started. One of the biggest winners on paper, a player that there's going to be a hive in the redraft and best ball community, and dynasty managers holding this player are looking at a guy that many are calling the year two breakout at the running back position, and that's Bhayshul Tuten. Travis Etienne signs a mammoth deal to become a New Orleans Saint. Bhayshul Tuten was a player that was extremely athletically gifted. Everyone knows about the 40 time, the speed score, and Pat, there was a lot of people betting on him last year to take over for Travis Etienne. Didn't work out that way, but Tuten did flash some talent, and he has that undeniable athletic upside. Are you there? Is Bhayshul Tuten a player who could go from like a non-starter to like running back 15 in a season?
I think he could, Theo. Right now, the other running backs on the Jacksonville roster are LaQuinn Allen, DJ Dallas, and Jaquindon Jackson. So, the Jaguars could certainly still sign someone at running back, Sean Tucker, Najee Harris, Emmanuel Wilson, and they'll probably draft another running back, but there is obviously going to be a greater opportunity for Tuten than there was as just a strict backup to Travis Etienne. I mean, Tuten had 83 carries and 10 catches last year. And if there is no one and Liam Cohen entrusts Bhayshul Tuten to handle a substantial load, and we know he's probably not going to be a 20-touch-a-game workhorse, but he's going to get more work than he had last year, and Liam Cohen has been a rainmaker for running backs. Like, the hope is that Tuten might be able to have the same sort of season that Bucky Irving had for the Buccaneers in 2024 when Cohen was the Bucs offensive coordinator. So, yeah, man, I've got him like running back 24 in Dynasty, and I almost feel like that's conservative. But even if he has a partial workload in a Liam Cohen offense, I would feel pretty good about that.
And just to add context to this, without diving into the names, would you take Bhayshul Tuten or the entire field of running backs in this upcoming draft class? Not Bhayshul Tuten the prospect, Bhayshul Tuten heading into year two of Jacksonville. Or I'll give you your choice. You can have any of the guys in the 2026 class. After draft day, I'll let you go through the entire list. You can pick one of them, or you can have Bhayshul Tuten.
I mean, Jeremiyah Love is the only one I would rather have.
Well, besides Love.
Okay,
Love.
no.
I'm sorry. I framed that wrong.
Okay.
You're RB2 in this
Yeah,
class.
no.
Love him by a mile.
I want Tuten over everyone else in the class. I mean, in rookie rankings, I've got like 11 wide receivers who I would take before the RB2. So it's just not an exciting running back class. And yeah, I'd much rather have Tuten.
Yeah, so there you go. Pat would take Bhayshul Tuten heading in, not knowing if they're going to sign another free agent. And again, he dodged a number of the big names that would have really hurt him. I think a Tyler Algier signing would have been something where we said, uh-oh, Bhayshul Tuten's maybe going to lose 30% of those carries, and the targets might go down. They also avoided a pass-catching running back. A guy like Kenneth Gainwell there, maybe an upgrade over LaQuint Allen. That would have been very, very annoying. To me, there's a lot of parallels between what we're seeing from Bhayshul Tuten at this point in the year and what we saw from Chase Brown going from year one to year two. Chase Brown that year, like you said, Bhayshul Tuten, the touches were limited. Chase Brown, his rookie season, had 58 touches. The following year goes way, way up, goes over 280, and averages 15.9 points per game. I think because of the quality of the Jacksonville offense, we might be there with Bhayshul Tuten. Pat, what would it take to get him off your hands right now from a sell point? Is there a level right now where you're like, okay, you want to take the mystery box, I'm selling to you. Name your price.
Man, I'm trying to think in terms of rookie picks, what I would be willing to take from him. Like, I don't know if I would even, maybe I'd take 106. That's kind of my line in the sand. Like, I want to be able to get, one of those top three receivers, or maybe Kenyon Sadiq. And I'm not sure if I love any of Denzel Boston, Casey Concepcion, Omar Cooper enough to settle for a pick lower than 106.
Absolutely love that one. And that shows your confidence level in Bhayshul Tuten. Let's talk about one more player before we take a break. Let's talk about, within the state of Florida, Emeka Egbuka, who, when Zach Robinson was hired as the new offensive coordinator, he sung the praises of Egbuka, saying he thinks Egbuka is going to take this big leap forward, and basically said he thinks he's going to look better in year 2, better in year 3, and it's just a role that's going to continue to expand. Didn't use the words like wide receiver 1, but basically talked about him like you would an alpha wide receiver 1. But in the back of our heads, Pat, Mike Evans just sort of loomed over the situation. When Mike Evans is on a football field with Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans could be 52 years old. Baker Mayfield's still going to give him a glance when he's open. Now Mike Evans is a San Francisco 49er. Your expectations for Emeka Egbuka, who started the year off extremely strong, a little bit banged up, and then ended the year sort of very poorly, like a tale of two seasons with Egbuka. We've seen the good and we've seen the mediocre. Will we get a consistent good based on the availability of targets and the availability of a high-end role this year in Tampa?
I'm pretty optimistic. Egbuka has a chance to be the alpha with Evans out of the picture. And, you mentioned the early start last season, 5 touchdowns in his first 5 games, and he was the wide receiver 3 in PPR scoring through the first 5 weeks. So Egbuka had this fantastic start, and that was after he got all this buzz in training camp about being a revelation and how good he looked there after being a first-round pick, where he was thought to be kind of a marginal first-round guy. So, but yeah, then the season kind of went sideways on him. Like, he tweaked his hamstring in week 6, played through it, but just wasn't as effective. And I think Baker Mayfield's performance kind of fell off a little after that hot start. Like, there were some offensive line injuries in Tampa, but then even when their offensive line got healthier later in the season, things didn't really get better for Mayfield and Egbuka. First 5 weeks of the season, Egbuka 20.5 PPR points a game, and he caught 65.8% of his targets. From week 6 on, 7.8 PPR points a game, 42.7% catch rate. So there was a clear just line of demarcation there. And it's worth noting that when Egbuka was on that 5-game heater to open the season, yeah, Chris Godwin didn't play the first 3 of those games, and Mike Evans didn't play the last 2 of those games. But Evans also missed 7 games, and Godwin missed 5 games during the 12-game stretch where Egbuka's production kind of cratered. So I want to bet on Egbuka. Like for me, he's a top 15 dynasty receiver,
Yeah.
kind of like on that back end of that. And man, if anyone is selling based on the late season tailspin for him, I want to buy.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely a buy, and he's not a player you want to sell. I think a lot of times that we take the glass half empty approach with these guys when they finish poorly. I would argue that if Egbuka would have had his stats completely flipped here, Pat, where started the year off slowly and then ended with the last 5 games at 20 points per game, like you mentioned, the dynasty marketplace for him would be going absolutely nuts right now. But it happened in September, and it didn't happen in December. But at the end of the day, we've seen it, and we've seen it with Baker Mayfield. I'm optimistic about this one. Zach Robinson was a guy that for when he first came on the scene, people were like, this guy's a genius. This is the next McVay guy. There was like 3 or 4 teams that wanted Zach Robinson as their offensive coordinator before he went to Atlanta. Now he sort of falls upwards. Atlanta, he didn't exactly set the world on fire, and he's in a better situation. You've got Baker Mayfield, who's sort of a bounce-back candidate in his own right, light. And then you've got a bunch of kind of wide receivers like Jalen McMillan, Tez Johnson, who are good players, and older Chris Godwin. They bring back Kate Otten, so we avoid a high target earning tight end. And Isaiah Likely there would have been an annoying presence. So for me, Egbuka taking a big step forward and being like a year 2 leap wide receiver, I think we're there. So I'm with you. I'm optimistic about Emeka Egbuka. Pat, what do you have going on this time of year? You guys are very busy as we are. This is a peak off season with all the free agent content. What do you have going on over at Fantasy Pros?
Well, we're definitely doing a lot of free agent reaction coverage, Theo, videos, full-length shows, and articles. Although, man, it was kind of that day one tsunami, and things have kind of slowed to a trickle or a light stream since then. We're obviously doing a lot of stuff getting ready for the NFL draft and for people's dynasty rookie draft. So there's a lot of rookie coverage too, among other things. So I hope people check out the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast and the Fantasy Pros Dynasty Podcast. And we've got a new Dynasty YouTube channel that I hope people will subscribe to, along with our new Tailgate channel, which is more general football talk. So, if people want to get their fills of Fantasy Pros on YouTube, check out those 2 channels.
Yeah, shout out to the team you guys have over there. Derek Brown, D-Bro is a big guest of ours over here. I podcasted with you a million times, Pat. And Andrew Erickson, I got to drag him over in the Fantasy Point streets. I haven't had him on for about a year, so I'm gonna give him a shout. But you guys do great work over there. Highly recommend all of Pat's work. And I'll give you a shout out, Pat. I always tell you this on podcasts, but I podcast all the time. And one of the influences on me was I love the way that you did Fits on Fantasy way back in the day. People will appreciate that one. Anybody who listened to that pod, that was absolute fire, and it definitely influenced me on the way that I conduct my podcast. So, Pat, you've been doing this for a while, and you do it great. So, big shout out to you for continuing to put out awesome work in the fantasy space.
Oh, thanks, Theo. Yeah, man, I am a big fan of yours. Love consuming your stuff. You're one of my favorite guys in the industry. And in light of recent events, I suppose I should probably thank you for following through on your agreement to have me on as a guest and not pulling out and scheduling another guest in my place. I'm glad I wasn't the Max Crosby to someone else's Trey Hendricks.
Oh, no, I thought about Max Crosbying you, Pat, and pulling a rug and going Andrew Erickson. Andrew Erickson also said his Venmo fee was cheaper than yours, but I honored the Venmo fee. I hope you got that one. Make sure you look for it by the time we're done recording. So, craziness with that one. We're going to unpack that over here on Fantasy Points on the regular channel. Brett Whitefield and I will talk about the draft ramifications of that, where we thought the Raiders had 2 first-round picks. Now there's a little bit of scrambling, really a rug pull from the Baltimore Ravens. I'm sure a lot of teams are going to be very apprehensive, and a lot of agents very apprehensive about doing business with Baltimore about the way this thing went down. Just a wild situation with Max Crosby. But let's talk about the San Francisco 49ers here. We had sort of a negativity where there was a lack of clarity with the pass-catching weapons besides Ricky Pearsall. You have George Kittle looking like he's going to start the year out missing 8 games, 10 games. I mean, I'm not a doctor here, and people always get mad when I give that sort of a timeline, but older player, big injury, Pat. Can't count on him for the first half of the year, in my opinion. Then you have the Trent Williams might get traded. And the wheels feel like they were falling off for San Francisco. Then they go and make this signing where they sign Mike Evans, and not to a 1-year deal, a 3-year deal for Mike Evans. It feels a lot like last year when the LA Rams went and got Devontae Adams, and you bring him over, and people are like, yeah, he was fantastic in Tampa Bay, but how will he do in a new offense? I think they're crazy if you're fading Mike Evans with Brock Purdy here. Mike Evans is older, but he's showed no signs of slipping. Brock Purdy's always been a very, very solid quarterback, no matter who's out on the field with him. To go from a Jawan Jennings to a Mike Evans, I think is a significant upgrade. And this might be the biggest alpha we've ever seen play with Brock Purdy. And I know that we saw like the great seasons from Debo, the great seasons from Brandon Ayuk, but Mike Evans, when he's fully healthy out there, is a absolute touchdown machine. Your thoughts of this one, Pat?
I like it for Purdy. And I'm with you. No reason to expect a huge drop off from Evans. I don't know if he has another like 1,300 yard season in him, but I'm fully expecting that if he stays healthy, he's going to crank out another 1,000-yard season.
And will he crank out a double-digit touchdown season? I think that will be the driver for him fantasy-wise. Are you seeing that sort of season in the wheelhouse?
Yeah, assuming we get Kittle on PUP and he misses at least 6 games, I would think Evans, like, I would probably want to bet the over on whatever his touchdown number is on DraftKings or FanDuel or whatever. So, yeah, I'd be optimistic about that. And yet, Theo, like, there's not much behind Evans and Pearsall on that wide receiver depth chart. There's like Jacob Cowing and Jordan Watkins. So I don't think the Evans signing necessarily eclipses Ricky Pearsall. Like I still think there's room for a Pearsall breakout this year. But yeah, having Evans and throwing him into the Kyle Shanahan offense, like that's a nice get for the 49ers and for Purdy.
I think that you're spot on with the Pearsall one, and I think that he's a trade candidate for anybody sort of fading him because of the Evans signing. I think there's a scenario where we've seen Debo and Ayuk thrive next to one another. We've also seen it where it's George Kittle with one of those two guys at varying points. Brock Purdy is extremely efficient. He's never up there when it comes down to the number of pass attempts, but he's right there with the efficiency and the downfield targets. I think if Ricky Pearsall stays healthy and if Mike Evans stays healthy, you could be looking at a season where they both get 110, 115 targets, but are both extremely efficient. So yeah, I'm taking a bullish stance. Now, Trent Williams is one where we're going to keep an eye on that one, and I'm hopeful that both sides come to an agreement here, because that would be a whole nother variable. If they actually trade Trent Williams, it's really hard to replace a Trent Williams. I would argue it's sort of impossible to replace a Trent Williams. I think there's probably naysayers listening to this saying, the guy's 37, they might know something. But Trent Williams is pretty special offensive lineman. So the splits are not kind to Brock Purdy without Trent Williams, but we haven't seen the splits with Mike Evans, Pat. So I'm really excited about this one. Real quick hitter for you. Are you interested in taking on Mike Evans if you are a contending dynasty team as sort of a mercenary 1-year bet to put in your wide receiver 3 or flex spot and just sit back and hopefully get a strong season?
Yes, I'd be willing to do that. And I think if you have Mike Evans on your roster and you're maybe not ready to contend in 2026, this is a good result for you because it props up his trade value.
Yeah, I've seen some sharp FFPC managers sort of in rebuild situations trading Mike Evans straight up for a 2027 second. I don't think that trade was there for you a week ago. Right. It might even be a little light. I think the way that I would try to do it is I would wait till the first month of the season. I would take my chances there because I think that he's going to perform. And Scott Barrett's on this one as well. Brett Whitefield's on this one as well. We recorded the other day on Fantasy Football Daily to break down the free agent stuff. We did it live, which was really fun. But we're all sort of very optimistic about Evans. Maybe he might not stay on the field, but when he's on the field, we should get a fast start to the year. So you might get better value trading him in September. There's always risk doing that. than trading him now before the rookie draft. But your league is different than my league, and somebody might overpay you. Let's keep this conversation going. We talk about an old wide receiver. We talk about a quarterback. Let's go with a young wide receiver. Luther Burden, not only a winner from free agency where Olamide Zaccheaus signs with Atlanta, and Olamide Zaccheaus, you say that name, it's like PTSD for Luther Burden managers because we're like, Olamide Zaccheaus, his performance, they're not getting Burden the targets. Yes, that was how it was for a good portion of the year last year. And then the big one, DJ Moore traded to the Buffalo Bills for a second-round pick, Pat. So Luther Burden is just dodging bullet after bullet here, and it was a player that there was already enthusiasm for in the Dynasty community. And I would say in the best ball and redraft community, Burden's being drafted around wide receiver 20 right now, an underdog. People are into this breakout. After what Chicago did, do you think they're fully embracing Luther Burden in like a quasi poor man's Amon-Ra St. Brown role in this offense? Should we have tons of optimism for Burden, or do you think wide receiver 20 is a good target for him and people need to sort of temper their expectations?
Yeah, I think the runway looks pretty clear now, Theo, with DJ Moore out. And obviously, that bodes well for Roma Dunze and Colston Loveland, too. But Burden was it was interesting the way they did keep the training wheels on with him and start Zaccheaus ahead of him as the primary slot guy early in the season, and then kind of let Burden loose a little bit more down the stretch. And he was fantastic, especially from an efficiency standpoint. I mean, his yards per route run, I think for rookies, he's the best over the last however many years, other than Odell Beckham Jr. So yeah, I think there's reason to be excited about him. He's he moves differently than other players, Theo. It's like watching Allen Iverson play basketball. He's just so quick that he is hard to stay with. And I think that's going to lead to success. We saw the year 2 breakout for him at Missouri, playing in the SEC against top competition. And I know JJ Zacharyson and some of the other guys who do prospect modeling love that early breakout with him. So even when his junior year was a little bit of a letdown when, he was banged up for part of the year, Brady Cook, his quarterback, was banged up for part of the year, he still graded out really well in these prospect models. And I think we saw why down the stretch last year. So, yeah, I'm really excited about him. I've got him at wide receiver 11 in my Dynasty rankings.
Pat, burying the lead right there. Wide receiver 11 for Luther Burden. I'm really optimistic on this one. There's kind of a mixed opinions here at Fantasy Points on Luther Burden. Some people are I'm in agreement with you. There's some people sort of pushing back on the true breakout level. What does the ceiling season look like for Burden? I think he could go absolutely nuts. It feels like, we talked about Egbuka. I think Burden and Egbuka and Tedero McMillan, for that matter, last year we were burned by the year 2 wideouts, and a lot of the people who bet on the year 2 breakout wideout season, BTJ, Ladd McConkey, big kind of letdowns there. Malik Neighbors gets injured. I think that the market is kind of ripe for a year 2 wide receiver revenge tour. Completely with you on Luther Burden. I love him in this offense. And even if you take the most bullish Colston Loveland scenario there is, which is Loveland ends up going full-on Rob Gronkowski this year. He's the tight end 1 overall. It breaks through over Bowers, over McBride. There's still a ton of targets in that offense, and an offense where they were top 8 in scoring last year in Ben Johnson's first year. I think them taking a leap forward this year is a very, very good bet. We saw that in Detroit where year 1 was good, year 2 was great, year 3 was even better than any of them. Ben Johnson's that kind of guy. So love it. Luther Burden in a perfect situation for him, and everything's perfect. Unless we see Chicago drafting a wide receiver in the first round and doing something shocking, Luther Burden to the moon. Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. We could spend a couple of 15 minutes on who's the RB1 in Dynasty, who's the RB1 in redraft, but more likely than not, you're going to say one of those two guys. They are unbelievable players in their peak of their career, and both of them landed really, really, really well. We saw Tyler Algier, who was always sort of a thorn in the side of Bijan Robinson multiple times. Algier had 8 touchdowns last year. Of course, had the rookie year for Bijan where Algier got a bunch of touches in the Arthur Smith offense. But Algier just a very, very good player signs with the Arizona Cardinals, will compete for their starting running back position, probably the favorite there. And then we see Detroit trade David Montgomery. And there was some rumors with Detroit Lions peoples. I know Brett Whitefield was talking about this one, where they were sort of linked to Algier, bringing out a player like Algier's caliber to take that David Montgomery role. They end up going another way and signing Isaiah Pacheco, who to me is going to do absolutely zero to topping the ceiling outcome for Gibbs. So your expectations for Robinson and Gibbs, I know you're high on them. How high should we be?
Yeah, so hard to get any higher than 1 and 2 in Dynasty. They are these premium assets, but there is reason to think that they have increased their Dynasty value because of this, because whoever the Falcons bring in, and they are going to bring in someone, probably someone who's like Emmanuel Wilson caliber, or they draft a day 2 or day 3 running back. But whoever it is, as you mentioned, like Algier has been a thorn in the side of Bijan Robinson investors, and whoever they bring in is probably not going to be as big a thorn as Tyler Algier was. So there's that, and I also don't think Isaiah Pacheco is probably going to handle as many touches as David Montgomery has in recent years. And I know they kind of scaled back Monty's role a little bit last year, but I kind of expect that to continue going forward. Like, this is not going to be a Sonic and Knuckles situation again in Detroit.
Yeah, it's Sonic and whatever you want to call Isaiah Pacheco right now. So I'm completely with you. I think Pacheco is really more of a handcuff back than a guy who mixes in. And Pacheco is a much worse receiver than David Montgomery. So last year, Jahmyr Gibbs, 77 catches last year. That was the big number for me, where if Gibbs is going to have some Christian McCaffrey-esque season, and Gibbs has averaged, we say how high could these guys run? Gibbs has averaged 21.4 and 21.6 points per game over the last 2 years. Insane. But I do think there's a chance that he could be a 25-point-per-game scorer at some point in his career and have just a truly remarkable season where if you draft Jahmyr Gibbs, you automatically win your league type. I think we're there with Gibbs. And then Bijan, it's the interesting one where we don't feel as good about the quarterback situation in Atlanta, clearly, with Tua Tagovailoa and Michael Penix in some sort of a competition, or does Penix get fully healthy? We don't really know. But Bijan is such an unbelievable receiver, but he could also up the ante in terms of the touchdown runs this year. So just losing Tyler Algier behind him, I'll take my chances with a day 3 back in this class if they end up going in that direction. And I'll say that Pacheco's not fully out of the water. If Detroit ends up drafting somebody interesting in round 5, that player might be more of a threat. Pacheco looked really done to me, Pat, at points last year in KC.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it could be someone, who's not even widely regarded as a top 10 running back prospect, a Jam Miller or someone like that. Like, I would worry about that if I were Isaiah Pacheco.
So there was 2 running backs sort of on the still very much on the radar, where I have the beholder type players in Dynasty, and there was a few-day period where you saw a lot of Dynasty trade offers in your inbox involving RJ Harvey and Cam Skattebo. I'd say the great fear out in the Dynasty streets for both of these players getting annihilated in the free agent market. RJ Harvey managers had to hear that Denver was trying to get David Montgomery in that trade from Detroit. He ultimately becomes a Houston Texan. But then you read, hey, Denver might end up being the team that gets a Rico Dowdle. He ends up signing with Pittsburgh. Denver might be the team that ends up with a Kenneth Walker. Of course, he goes to Kansas City. And then Cam Skattebo, there was a lot of steam in the New York media that Kenneth Walker might be a New York Giant. Both of these players avoid anyone of note. RJ Harvey, of course, has to deal with J.K. Dobbins again, but Dobbins is a player that I think we can say that's kind of a positive for RJ Harvey if that's his biggest competition. And Cam Skattebo, we're going to have to hold our breath throughout round 1 with that Jeremiyah Love potential annihilation there. Could be James Robinson, Travis Etienne vibes times 100 with that one. But your thoughts on these guys? Maybe I don't even know how to quantify this one. How nervous are you for both of these backs? Do you feel safe with both of them on your roster? Who's the safer asset to hold?
So it's funny. I've got Skattebo in a lot of leagues, mainly because my partner on one of my co-hosts on the Dynasty podcast for Fantasy Pro, Scott Bogman, was over the moon about Skattebo and just like taking him in the first rounds of mocks in our mock draft, rookie mock draft shows last year, and just getting annihilated in the comments for it. And it turned out like looks like a pretty good call, until the injury. He was way out kicking expectations. So, we dodged there was a lot of smoke about the Kenneth Walker potential with the Giants and coming over. We've dodged that, but we still have to dodge that Jeremiyah Love bullet. So I guess my palms are still a little bit sweaty on Cam Skattebo, Theo. With RJ Harvey, so I think it's good that J.K. Dobbins is a guy who, there's always that injury risk, and probably a guy we're not envisioning having a long career. Like, this feels like a potential threat to RJ Harvey's usage in 2026. Definitely. Long term, I don't know, but I see it as kind of a negative that, like, will they ever envision RJ Harvey as a guy who can sort of be, and he was never going to be a workhorse, but like sort of be the lead of a committee, the head of an ensemble cast. Because Dobbins averaged 15.3 carries in the 10 games he played last year. And in those 10 games, RJ Harvey averaged 5 carries a game. And anything he did was kind of in the receiving game. He had 2.5 catches a game when Dobbins was there. But then Harvey goes from averaging 5 carries a game with Dobbins around to 13.7 carries a game after the Dobbins injury. Was RJ Harvey so good and so convincing after the injury to Dobbins that Harvey is the genie you can't put back in the bottle? Like, I don't know about that. And it seems like maybe they're trying to stuff him back into the bottle. So I think he probably averages more than 5 carries a game this year with Dobbins around, but I don't think he's averaging 13.7 carries a game either.
I think Harvey's one of the more interesting players in Dynasty because he's a second-year player, but you have to treat him like a veteran. And if you're holding him on your roster, you're hoping to get utility again this year because all bets are off. If he goes to his second contract and he's 27 years old on his second contract and he never really broke through in Denver in a major way, the market's probably going to treat him a little bit more like a backup running back. That being said, the fact that it's Dobbins has this incredibly long sample size of performing well when he's on the field and then not being able to finish the season. It's been a incredibly unfortunate career for J.K. Dobbins, a player who's somewhere in the multiverse. There's a bunch of kids walking around in your town and my town with Dobbins jerseys on, Pat, because the guy's been a 6-time All-Pro. So the fact that Denver brings him back, if it's just Dobbins and maybe a Jaleel McLaughlin type runner as the competition for Harvey, I'll make a small bet that he leads that backfield in scoring. Maybe doesn't have a whole lot of impact for you, but he's a guy, quote unquote, like innings eater that you're going to get some flex value from, some RB2 value from. So from a ceiling perspective, Cam Skattebo is a much better ceiling outcome player, but there is a wide range of outcomes here with Cam Skattebo. I think that there's a chance that he gets nuked. Like you said, I think Jeremiyah Love is very much in play here for New York. If he can survive that, and it's him and Tyrone Tracy, then I think Skattebo will end up averaging more points than Harvey. They're both really interesting. I, on the flip side, had a bunch of Skattebo, and I sold a bunch of Skattebo. I sold actually one share last week in a big package deal to acquire some Omari and Hampton, who I don't mind. That's a whole nother. Anybody listening to this saying, Theo, you just said you could sell Omari and Hampton. Yes, I did, but in this particular instance, I got a really good value on Hampton, Skattebo in a package. And then I traded him last offseason towards the trade deadline in FFPC, a couple of shares when he was injured to get guys that went right in my lineup. So I have less exposure. I do have some Harvey, and he's a really hard player to move. I think at this point, I'm holding my Harvey shares and just holding my breath, Pat, because I'm not going to get much return, and I think I will get some utility, but I don't view him as a long-term asset, even though he's a year 2 player. So I said a lot there. Anything to push back or add to that?
No, I mean, it makes sense that although Dobbins could be an obstacle for RJ Harvey in 2026, it could have been worse. And the addition of Dobbins likely does prevent them from, I don't think, if they draft a running back, it's not likely before day 3. And if they sign another guy, it's likely to be a minor signing. And I think they already re-upped with like Tyler Bidet. So, I mean, they might not do much more to their running back room. And I think maybe Dobbins is, if not a very best case scenario for RJ Harvey, things certainly could have been worse.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on Denver in the NFL draft. Always sort of a team that you can't put your finger on which way they're going to go sometimes. Maybe they value one of these running backs, and that might actually be the real competition for Dobbins and Harvey. But we'll keep an eye on this situation. Pat, does Malik Willis lead all quarterbacks this year in rushing yardage? Willis goes from a backup last year in Green Bay behind Jordan Love, now is a Miami Dolphin, signed a 3-year deal. There's some really interesting takes here with Willis in sort of the dynasty marketplace now, where some people viewing him as an ultimate buy, others as an ultimate sell. But just taking a step back, how excited should we be about his potential as a runner, a great driver of fantasy scoring?
I do think he has a chance to maybe contend with Lamar Jackson for the league lead in rushing yards among quarterbacks. So 6 career starts, 44.8 rushing yards per game for Willis, 4 touchdown runs in those starts. So basically he's averaging about 8.5 fantasy points per game in his starts just with his legs. And then with the growth we saw out of him as a passer in Green Bay, this is looking pretty good. I feel pretty positive about Malik Willis. Might have been nicer to see him land in Arizona, where he would have been throwing to Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson, and where he would have been playing for Matt LaFleur's brother. So in Miami, not quite as appealing a group of pass catchers. He's got Jalen Waddle and a very good pass catching running back in Devon Achane. But man, I think I would have preferred the Arizona setup for him. Still, though, the strides this guy made during his time with the Packers, really impressive. Just the passing efficiency, Theo. And I think part of that, we know Miami is probably going to be one of the run heaviest teams in the league, just because I think if Malik Willis plays something close to 17 games, he's going to have over 100 rushing attempts. Like, that's a slam dunk. Plus, they've got Achane, Ollie Gordon, Jalen Wright. This is going to be a real run-heavy team. But being so run-heavy, I think that could help his passing efficiency. And we saw him be very efficient last year when Love got that concussion against the Bears late in their, well, not even late. It was early in the second, or midway through the second quarter, I think, of their Week 16 game against the Bears. Willis comes in 9 of 11 passing for 121 yards and a touchdown. And then the next week against the Ravens, 18 of 21, 288 yards and a touchdown. Like, he had 84.4% completion percentage in those 2 games. And he averaged like 12.8 yards per attempt. Now, he's not going to be that efficient for the whole season, but man, like, when you have that sort of a running threat, it makes things easier in the passing game.
I think with Willis, it's really interesting. I'm completely with you. I think he's going to score a lot of fantasy points this year. I wonder how good Miami will be, and we'll be holding our breath next offseason, where Malik Willis finishes like the quarterback 13, gets a bunch of rushing yards, and then Miami's picking like 6th overall, and there's all these quarterbacks, and we're like, will he get annihilated? I think that could be a scenario, but I do think anytime he's on the field, he's going to score some points. And I think he's a little bit better than this guy's a bridge quarterback. I think he's more than a bridge quarterback. I think he's an optimistic signing type quarterback for Miami, who I think ultimately would love to get a better than expected season out of their team and just build with Willis and kind of go elsewhere. Just from a fundamental perspective, is he a player that if you've been rostering, you should put him on the market and see what you could get for him with sort of the mystery box that everyone's optimistic for? A lot of us are saying positive things about Malik Willis, but again, we haven't seen him with a large sample size of starts. NFL defensive coordinators are really, really good. We could be wrong. Or are you saying, you know what? I'm rolling with it. I've had him this long. Now I'm going to actually get to start him.
I want to roll with it. And I was recommending that people deal for him months ago, because it was inevitable that someone was going to sign him and make him a starter. And yet anyone's trade value charts or trade value calculators, he was just grossly undervalued in those. And I don't know, like when those are recalibrated, and I haven't checked like what Malik Willis's value is in those now. And I have been trying to argue that we needed to bring him up more in our own dynasty trade value charts. I just want to see where that lands, but I feel like his perceived value was lagging his actual value for a while. And I don't know if that has changed enough yet with the signing. So I don't know if you could get what I consider to be fair value for him in a deal just yet.
Yeah, I think you're going to get a lot more utility out of him on your actual in your actual lineup than you would just straight up trading him. I think a kind of a simplistic way of looking at things, Justin Fields was not a good NFL quarterback from a wins and loss perspective, but Pat, he was putting up tremendous fantasy scoring numbers for us multiple seasons because of the rushing production. If Malik Willis can maintain that sort of rushing ability, 40 yards a game, then you're at a point where he's almost a QB1, even if the passing stats are poor. So I'm with you. I think hold on to Malik Willis and just be excited. I actually have a very good amount of Malik Willis. Had him on a bunch of teams last year, was able to use him in week 17 as well. So I was able to bank those Baltimore points. Ran pretty pure with that one. So I'm pretty optimistic. And I've had a bunch of people trying to making those, okay trade offers for Willis. Haven't had a Godfather offer come in my inbox yet that really made me think, I got to pull the trigger and send him. And I think on the flip side of that, if you're looking for quarterback utility, he's a really solid player to kick the tires on and see if you think your league mates are selling high on. And it'll be interesting to see where he goes in Dynasty startups too, Pat. We'll keep an eye on that one. Alec Pierce, another player who I have a ton of exposure to in Dynasty. It couldn't have gone any better for Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce, I guess maybe thered be some excitement if he was the new wide receiver one in New England. But Indianapolis gives him the absolute fortune, a 4-year deal, 115 plus million, and then immediately trades away Michael Pittman Jr., who'd been their wide receiver one for several years, Pat. A really strong run for Pittman Jr. He is a Pittsburgh Steeler. And Alec Pierce, there's some beat reporters here saying that the team is saying that they're going to get Alec Pierce in that 8 target per game range. Averaged 12 plus points per game last year, averaged 10 plus the year before, has led the NFL in yards per reception in back-to-back seasons, 25 years old. Feels like one of these guys that might have his best season as a pro, as a fifth-year player. We don't see that as much lately, Pat, but it feels like it with Pierce to me. Are you as optimistic as I am?
I'm pretty optimistic. It's been a nice slow burn with his career, and it's funny, Theo, when he first signed, it was kind of a letdown at first, honestly. Like, it was going to be so much fun to see Alec Pierce land in a new spot and try to project how he'd do in his new surroundings. And after he resigned, it was like, oh, everything's going to be the same except the quarterback situation looks worse because Daniel Jones is coming off a torn Achilles. But then with the Pittman trade, like that was like the clouds parted and the sun was shining on the Alec Pierce investors. Now there's room for target growth for Pierce. Now maybe he's more than just a go ball guy and gets to run the fuller route tree. Because he averaged 5.6 targets a game last year, and his average depth of target was 18.9 yards. So it's pretty safe to assume that weekly target counts for Alec Pierce are going to go up, and the average depth of target is going to come down a little bit. And I think it's a real net positive for him going forward.
Yeah, it's always interesting because you get these kind of snarky comments when somebody says the 8 to 10 targets. You'll see a bunch of guys sort of being critical of beat reporters as a whole, saying that they don't understand, really that the total number of plays in a game, sort of an impossible number. But I think that a lot of these guys are tuned in, and internally, Indianapolis for years has spoke glowingly about Pierce. He's been a 90 target guy. All he really needs to do is get to that 120 range with his level of efficiency as a downfield receiver and the big play explosive nature to his game. If we can get him up to the 125 target range, I think that's realistically a guy who can be a 15 point per game scorer, which puts him right in the wheelhouse of a wide receiver one. I think he's actually pretty underrated right now as a dynasty asset, where Pat, it kind of reminds me of the Christian Kirk signing a couple years ago. Completely different players, but Kirk signs the mega deal with Jacksonville years and years ago. Gets attached to year 2 Trevor Lawrence, and you saw all these people just making fun of the contract. I can't believe they gave Christian Kirk this much money. We fast forward a couple months, and Christian Kirk finished as a wide receiver 1 in counting stats, and I believe he was like wide receiver 16, 17 in points per game. Had a really strong year. Alec Pierce sort of feels like that, where the market is like, how could you give Alec Pierce this much money? It's not our money. And the team is showing you how much they like the guy. So, yeah, your thoughts on trading for Alec Pierce sort of before it's unveiled as the wide receiver 1?
I think he's pretty well protected because I don't know. It seems unlikely the Colts are going to throw a lot of money at any other wide receiver and who's out there anyway. I mean, Jawan Jennings, no one who's any sort of existential threat to Alec Pierce's target totals. And then, yeah, they could add a wide receiver in the draft. They don't have a first round pick because of the Sauce Gardner trade. So maybe they add a Chris Brazzell or a Jacoby Lane or a Bryce Lance on day 2 or day 3. But it's not going to be someone who poses a serious threat to the target share of Alec Pierce again. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is a great spot. I think trading him, for anyone who kind of doubts it, I mean, I do think there's potential that he goes from this sort of designated lid lifter, sort of a limited role for fantasy where he was sort of depending on, high efficiency, but like was really kind of a splash play guy, to maybe he's more consistent. Like, I've always seen a little bit of Jordy Nelson in the Alec Pierce game. I don't know if he's ever going to be the master of the back shoulder throw the way Jordy was, but, just a big, fast dude who can do a lot of damage. And, there were some pretty good receivers in Green Bay when Jordy was there, and Jordy still got his and was like a valuable fantasy piece every year. I'd like to see Alec Pierce have that sort of evolution.
And a reminder to everyone, Alec Pierce was a 2nd-round pick, too. This guy had extremely good draft capital. Everything's really setting up for him. You're still allowed to be sort of a late bloomer. We saw it this past year where goes over 1,000 receiving yards, played only 15 games. I think there's room to run in this profile, and maybe the marketplace hasn't adjusted completely to this one. Let's talk about another couple of winners here. Is this a blackjack split scenario? If you were rostering Kenneth Walker and rostering Zach Charbonnet, just how excited are you today? Charbonnet, of course, has to deal with how quickly can he get back on the field, but the franchise seems to absolutely love him. And Kenneth Walker, I mean, to the moon in Kansas City. Everybody's excited about this one. He's probably going to be a top 10 running back in redraft and in best ball by the time we record. Your thoughts on this sort of scenario, these two players escaping one another?
Yeah, split those aces, dealer. Kenneth Walker, as good as his postseason run was, Theo, we know how frustrating he was during the regular season with Zach Charbonnet constantly poaching touchdowns, stealing touches. And for Charbonnet, it was kind of the same thing. Here's a guy who's a pretty imposing downfield runner who, with a steadier diet of carries, might be impactful in fantasy. It didn't get that with Kenneth Walker around. So, yeah, I mean, Charbonnet's coming off the injury, and Seattle is probably going to add something at running back in the draft. Maybe they sign one of these lower tier veterans. But again, it's not going to be anything. The competition for touches isn't going to be as fierce as Kenneth Walker. So like it for Charbonnet, like it a lot for Walker. I think this is good for both guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's scenarios like this where it's like you roster both guys and potentially end up with two starters. A lot of times it burns you. But you go from having both of these guys and not knowing which week to start which guy to a scenario where you could end up with a running back 1 this year for Kenneth Walker, and then Zach Charbonnet, depending on what Seattle does in the draft and the rest of free agency, Charbonnet could be returning to a really, really strong workload. Again, we don't know the timetable to return, but it's a player that I think internally the organization likes more than maybe the fantasy community. Charbonnet's been an elite touchdown scorer for them for multiple seasons there, and I think he's got the potential to be a really productive receiver out of the backfield, a very efficient receiver, and there's no pressure on Seattle to get a Kenneth Walker touches here. So Charbonnet could return in a major way, could be a guy that's parked in your IR slot, and then you maybe roll him out in week 12 or whatever, not to speculate on how long he'll be out, but he could end the year helping you out. So really a great situation if you were rostering those guys. Under the radar name here that you and I were talking about before the show, you're interested in seeing Jalen Nailor operating in this Clint Kubiak offense. They needed a wide receiver. They were linked to Alec Pierce for a few days. Didn't happen. End up giving Jalen Nailor a pretty strong contract here. The analytics community liked him, Pat. Had some really efficient moments in Minnesota as the wide receiver 3 there. Do you think this is a player that could take a step forward, a leap forward this year in Vegas?
I think he maybe could with bigger role. Just not a lot of competition in the Las Vegas wide receiver room right now. Jack Bech didn't pop as a rookie. Dante Thornton, had his moments, but didn't look like a guy who's going to be a high volume receiver. Brock Bowers obviously is their number one pass catcher, but there is room, I think, for Nailor to come in and carve out a fantasy relevant role for himself. And now with the Max Crosby trade fizzling, like that very well could have been a receiver that the Raiders were taking at number 14 with the Ravens' first round pick. And now they don't have that option. So it's not going to be Jordan Tyson, Carnell Tate, or Mekhi Lemon coming in for the Raiders.
Yeah, it's interesting because Jalen Nailor is kind of a throwaway one. People are like, I don't want to hear about this, but free agent wide receivers have hit in a major way over the last couple years, and sometimes you take a step back and sign a guy and you know what his strengths are. There's a chance that Nailor could end up being a wide receiver 3 if this Clint Kubiak offense takes off, and he's going to cost you absolutely nothing. Yeah. If you're a best ball drafter and you don't want to listen to this from a dynasty lens, you can draft Jalen Nailor in like the 18th, 19th round on Underdog very, very easily. He could end up crushing that ADP. Two players who I think are losers here. Let's first talk about sort of the obvious one. DK Metcalf last year, there was a little bit of hope and optimism from Metcalf managers that traded to Pittsburgh. George Pickens ends up getting traded to Dallas. And Metcalf was decent, had a couple of decent games, but now has to compete for targets with Michael Pittman, who Pittsburgh obviously values very, very highly based on the amount that they traded for him. Your thoughts on DK Metcalf? Is he a player you just want to get out of Dodge, get off of your dynasty rosters?
Yeah, I mean, I don't love the quarterback pairing with Aaron Rodgers, a guy who doesn't really want to challenge defenses downfield as much. And Metcalf had this strange transition from being the high air yards guy in Seattle, the low yards after catch guy, to being the low ADOT high yak guy in Pittsburgh. And it worked kind of early on in the season, not so much later on. It's kind of a weird pairing to begin with. Then you get the arrival of Pittman. And I mean, I do feel it was inevitable the Steelers were going to add something at wide receiver and get at least one more legit guy. Maybe this preempts them from taking a receiver with their first round pick, because I know they need help on the left side of the offensive line too. So I guess the Pittman signing didn't have a big effect on where I'm ranking Metcalf in Dynasty, but I wasn't all that bullish on him for Dynasty to begin with.
Yeah, I think it's sort of an eye of the beholder one here, where he's 28 years old, turns 29 this season. The production was sort of middling, and I think if he was going to have a really big year, it would have been this past year in Pittsburgh with the lack of target competition. Now you get Michael Pittman, who's got multiple seasons of 140-plus targets, and this past year was heavily targeted for a long stretch with Daniel Jones, sort of fizzled out at the end. But Michael Pittman, that's sort of the new hotness here. DK Metcalf is the guy who Mike McCarthy inherited, and Michael Pittman's the one that Mike McCarthy went and traded for. And I know it's not Mike McCarthy pulling all the strings, but it's still the Mike McCarthy offense here. So Pittman, I think I'm more interested in if I could choose one to roster on my Dynasty rosters. Are you with Pittman on that one? Who would you rather have, if any, on your Dynasty rosters?
Between these two guys, between Metcalf and Pittman, I Pittman, but not by much. Or excuse me, Metcalf, but not by much.
So close enough for Pat and Eileen Pittman. Let us know in the comments who you would rather roster, Michael Pittman or DK Metcalf. You could just say neither as well. I think that's an appropriate response too. But the player that is the most tilting name that we're going to talk about today, possibly, Bucky Irving, who there was nothing but Bucky Irving enthusiasm for weeks and weeks and weeks here. Zach Robinson said all these wonderful things, compared him to Bijan Robinson stylistically. Bucky Irving, the enthusiasm for him as an early third-round pick in early redraft leagues, early best ball drafts, and in the dynasty marketplace just sort of solidified himself in a spot where, yeah, you were really excited to have Bucky Irving on your roster once again. You end up also with the, hey, we're going to finally escape Rachaad White, who's been an annoying presence due to his pass-catching ability and the ability around the goal line. But then you end up with Kenneth Gainwell signing in Tampa, who was top 5 last year in running back receptions, top 5 in running back targets, finished as an RB2 last year. Gainwell coming off of an absolutely awesome season. Should you be nervous if you're rostering Bucky Irving? And Pat, I'll also add, you're not fully out of the water here with Sean Tucker, who Tampa Bay media has said he could end up being returning to Tampa. Is the Bucky Irving enthusiasm maybe a little bit over the top, or are you like, everything's okay?
I'm more towards the everything is okay, Theo. And I've been a Bucky Irving stan. As someone who didn't like him at all as a prospect after he ran a disappointing 40 time at the combine at his size, I'm like, nope, I'm not touching him, and deeply regretted not getting any shares of him in my dynasty leagues. And then he was just a revelation in that 2024 season. Now, I know his efficiency metrics seemed to crater last year. The Buccaneers did have a lot of offensive line injuries. I don't know. To my eye, like, he was the same guy. It's just like the holes were not there for him last year when they had been in 2024 for the most part. So, yeah, I mean, going from White and Tucker as sort of the guys who were thorns in his side, especially Tucker poaching all the goal line work, to just Gainwell. To me, it seems like kind of a push overall. Now, if Tucker does come back, as you mentioned, that's a possibility. Yeah, maybe I feel like he takes a slight value hit, but I think I'm still okay with it. As good as Gainwell showed out last year, like I think Bucky is the better guy, and I don't think like Gainwell is going to be any sort of existential threat to Irving's fantasy value.
I think also when you look at Gainwell, stylistically, you have a like-for-like replacement where if Bucky was to miss time, they wouldn't have to change the offense at all. So I think stylistically, it's pretty win for Tampa. It's, do they view Gainwell as anything more than they viewed like maybe a Rachaad White or a Sean Tucker? We don't know that answer. Bucky's certainly not a player you need to get out of Dodge with, but I do think it maybe lowers the ceiling outcome for Bucky. So remains to be seen. Let us know in the comments. What do you think this does to Bucky Irving? Are you nervous for your Bucky Irving shares here? Pat, this was absolutely awesome breaking it down with you. Highly recommend you go check out Pat's work. Let everybody know once again where they can find it, Pat.
Yeah, people can find me at fantasypros.com. Check out the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast and the Fantasy Pros Dynasty Podcast, and they can find me on Twitter or Blue Sky at Fitz_FF.
Yeah, highly recommend everything Pat's putting out. Make sure you stick with us here on Dynasty Life. Next show, I'm going to be joined by Scott Barrett doing a Dynasty Reddit AMA. We're going to be answering Dynasty questions. We're going to be covering it here on Dynasty Life. We'll cover a lot there. Make sure you're checking out the 2026 NFL Draft Podcast. Brett Whitefield and I every single week over on Fantasy Point's main YouTube page. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, make sure you go and subscribe. Fantasy Points Dynasty YouTube. We've grown very, very quickly, and we're going to continue to grow. There's also some extra YouTube-only content that we're dropping this month. Ryan Heath, Jacob Sanderson, Thomas Tipple, and myself. Go check it out. Fantasy Points Dynasty YouTube. We'll see you soon.